and we'll see where we get to. But yes, so we're joined by Ben and Charlotte. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. It's great to have both of you. I wonder if we just start off with a little bit about each of you and your background and how you got to where you are now. Ben, I'm going to go for you first, and then Charlotte, I'm coming to you.
Oh, great. Well, I guess I always kind of loved theatre and the performing arts. Even at school, I was kind of I did like the school musicals and all of that, very much the performer. And thank goodness I don't believe any of those videos still exist. But I was kind of, I was always taken about performing that. And it was only in, I guess just before GCSEs, we had to do work experience. And I was lucky enough to get work experience at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, where Miss Saigon was playing at the time. And I can just remember that it was only 1 week, but we kind of went from department to department, or I went from department to department. And it blew me away, because having just seen stuff in maybe smaller regional theatres, to see this kind of gargantuan, one of these 80s mega musicals, I was just in complete awe of kind of the stagecraft. So I think that sort of set me on a path in terms of wanting to get involved creatively, and I guess ultimately with lighting. So from that, then I left college. I did A levels, and then I went to Rose Bruford, where I studied. So I did the lighting design degree there. And then having left that, I guess I sort of worked a bit as a production lex, a bit as a programmer, slowly doing lighting design work, and it kind of spiraled from there, really.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's gone well. it's worked out well.
The spiraling has gone well. Yeah, I mean, it's taken its time to get there. But one thing I think I really benefited from is by needing to, I mean, even when I was at Rose Bruford, I did some work at White Light in the warehouse, and funnily enough, was back at Drury Lane, did some follow spotting on Miss Saigon at the time, and then later on My Fair Lady and the other shows that came in there. But I think by kind of doing a bit of everything within the lighting, well, I sort of, I've learned the craft, I guess, and I could see other people, doing their stuff, and even in terms of, I don't know, like focusing for someone, being, I think I'm quite good at calling a focus now, but primarily that's because I've got the memory of being the person at the top of the telescope on the lighting bridge focusing, so I sort of know how to describe it, and sort of some of the foibles of looking, whether it's, I don't know, flare off a barn door onto a border that you might not see from stage, but just say, can you double check that? Because I can remember having to deal with that and saying, should I mention that to the LD?
Yeah.
So yeah, sort of having sort of work my way up, really, just doing a bit of everything.
And when you started out, had the dream always been design, or did it just sort of, that just became what it was?
I guess no, because I quite enjoyed the programming as well. I mean, by that point, I'd gone to do the lighting design course I'd done the lighting design course at Rose Bruford, and I thought, I really enjoyed that. But I also enjoy, not that I do that much as a lighting designer, but I enjoy sort of that concert lighting, and so I enjoyed programming that. And at the time, some of the stuff where you kind of not quite busked it, but it was very much a manual sort of playing with the lights. I really enjoy music, so being able to respond to the music that way, I kind of get a real thrill from. And I get it to now when I see sort of my lighting designs play back, and they feel like they're connected to the music. But equally, there's a massive thrill if you're the one hitting the buttons, and there's a big accent and stab, and you get a big blast of light from a button that you've hit, and you feel like almost another musician in the band. So I can't remember what the question was really, but I'm just wishing on about lighting music. There we go.
Yeah. Charlotte, what about you? What was your route in, and how you got to where you are now?
I guess it started, I did my school work experience at Royal and Derngate, and that was because I liked drama, but I didn't want to go do my work experience in like a shop or a nursery or somewhere like that. So I somehow got my way into Royal and Derngate and was like, yeah, I'll go backstage. And like a bit like Ben, it just completely changed my world. And it was really cool. I remember like one of the first shows I did was like a 4 a.m. get-in for a dance show, and then I saw someone, like I'd never seen a moving light before, and I saw someone like changing the color on it, and it just it was amazing. And then so after that I went back to school and was just like, can I light everything now, please?
Yeah.
So I sort of ended up doing that, not even knowing what the lights were. So like when I went and studied at Lipper, I was like, oh, that's a source 4, is it? So I figured like all of that stuff out. And then, yeah, it was really fortunate to like still be in touch with some of the people there. So like when I finished uni, I went back to Royal and Derngate for about a year. Just a casual technician, did everything from follow spotting to get ins to get outs, all of that. And then was fortunate enough to be chosen to be the first Lumiere. So then that happened. And then I sort of have gone on from there, really. Did that for 6 months, learned everything about all sorts to do with lighting design and shows and how to be an assistant and all of that. And then somehow carried on with that and have sort of progressed a bit into associating as well and doing a few odd designs of my own.
And am I right in thinking that the Lumiere scheme is when you two met? Is that?
No, not quite.
Oh, really?
It was in advance of that. Actually, it's timely for this time of year. We met on a pantomime. Who would have thought it? I was lighting Peter Pan at the Derngate in Northampton, and Charlotte was one of the Lex crew and a follow spot operator. So that's when we first met. And that was Charlotte. That was pre Lumiere, wasn't it?
It was about like that Christmas before. I think I started Lumiere in like the April or that May, and it was that Christmas before it. Yeah, and then Ben, we just I think got chatting about all like shows and all sorts, and then you were like, oh yeah, come shadow me. So I went and shadowed you in the March, and then yeah, Lumiere happened, and then
that was it. Yeah. I think it was one of those like after a tech session or at night, sort of talking about it. Yeah, and yeah, Charlotte was. I think I can't remember if the Lumiere was confirmed, but. Yeah, certainly I was like, come and shadow, and it was Olivier's, was it at the Albert Hall, or was it?
Yeah. Oh no, at the Opera House.
At the Opera House.
Yeah. Because that was like my moment. I was like, if I ever get to go.
Yeah. Come and watch me like this little show of mine. So we'll start with a simple one.
Yeah.
And of course, then you did the Lumiere, and you've kind of gone from strength to strength. And once Charlotte had finished the Lumiere, we started at Leicester, didn't we? We did a production of Legally Blonde, which is the first time you officially assisted me.
Yeah, that was definitely. I remember there was a moment, like I think I was only booked for a few days, and then you wanted me to stay, and I think because I was like only just started out freelancing, and Ben was like, so are you free next week? And I was like, I am free till June.
I remember it was. Legally, it was one of those shows. There were various technical issues with it, with the FITS. I'm sure no one at Leicester would mind me saying so, but it meant that we started the tech. I don't think Sarah Brown was programming, and I'm not certain we really had even any presets in the lighting board or anything. We were literally flying with an empty show file. And if anyone who knows Legally Blonde, it's just, it was directed originally and created by a choreographer, so it's just one big dance music number after the next, and it was a baptism by fire. I think it wasn't again another little simple show to ease Charlotte in. It was. Yeah, I mean, had Charlotte not been there, I don't think my head would have, trying to wrangle pulling a show out like in no time at all, I should say, and manage spots and all of that. No, Charlotte was invaluable at that point.
That's brilliant. And had you been regularly using assistants before this, or did it all fall at quite a good time?
No, I think it all fell at a pretty good time. I think I'd done a small amount, but it was. I think I was at the point where I guess perhaps my workload and the shows I was doing meant that it wasn't. Without running myself into the ground, it felt that now was the time that I was like, help! I just need somebody else as well to help take some of the weight load. So yeah, I think it all we were fortuitous. It all happened at the same time, and I mean. Crikey, Charlotte and I were just trying to think, and we've probably done sort of upwards of 15 shows together, probably more than that now. I said to Charlotte, I said, oh, we've probably done about maybe 8, 9, 10 shows, and then we just kept listing all the shows we'd done, and it's like, oh, how the time flies.
And it's because you were having fun. That's what it was. That's brilliant. Now, this is quite a big question, but I wonder if between you could sort of describe a little bit about what you think the role of an assistant is, or certainly what it is when you two are working together. And I know that's tricky because it expands and contracts depending on the show.
Yeah, I guess. Well, I suppose it goes to start it off. I'm just trying to think. To start it off, I suppose it's exactly what when you asked me about had I had assistants before. I think the role of assistant became important to me at the point that the workload was such that it sounds really obvious, but that I couldn't handle it myself and deliver necessarily my best work, I guess. So I suppose as lighting designers, there's a point where we're kind of the bottleneck, aren't we? I mean, in that the information has to flow through us. So in the case of something like Legally Blonde, this is, well, yeah, exactly. In the case of Legally Blonde, when we were essentially lighting on the fly during a busy technical period, and people weren't necessarily, we didn't have the time to stop and spend a lot of time doing stuff. So therefore, Charlotte dealing with the follow spots meant that that's just one thing that doesn't have to come through my bottleneck, as it were. Do you know what I mean? There's I can be focusing on getting the cues in and the show lit, and just saying to Charlotte, can you just, if nothing else, just make sure you can see everyone, and then I'll just try to do the rest. I mean, that's probably it's a crude idea, but that's certainly a good start, isn't it, Charlotte?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you say, Rory, it expands and contracts you depending on the show and the schedule and all sorts of things that are varying factors that may happen. But it's essentially also just like helping the designer in any way you can to make everything happen. So if it is going to sort a load of notes out with a DSM because you're trying to get a load of cues plotted for the next session, or like doing the follow spot plot, or even going like, okay, you have no time, so I'm just going to go get you a coffee and a sandwich. So you
exactly that, I suppose it's yeah, it's supporting the work of the lighting designer, I guess. Yeah. And to say that varies depending on your relationship and in terms of what needed. I mean, I think to myself, last year when we were doing Joseph, I mean, one of the things that Charlotte you were looking at was we had roving booms in the wings, so just letting me know when they're speaking to stage management and liaising with the fact is when can I use that boom, and when, if I switch it on, it's going to be lighting up halfway up the wing, or not, as the case may be. Again, another piece of information that when there's so many bits of information flying around in my head, if I don't have to worry about that, and then I know that Charlotte's got that covered, then I know when something's available.
Or
not, as the case may be, without having to, and then I can work quicker because I'm not going to make the mistake of turning stuff on and then have stage management on can saying that we're blinding the crew in the wings, or whatever the case may be. It's managing that workload.
And it does sound like it's there's an element of keeping track of things, isn't there? Like little things that you're is in your peripheral, but can't be the main focus all the time for the designer, certainly.
Completely, and I think there's Charlotte will also suggest notes that, again, because if you're lighting really fast and you're trying to look at a million things but maybe missing something, then Charlotte might notice a focus note, say, I don't know, a boom is some sidelights clipping a portal or whatever it may be, that perhaps I haven't spotted, because at the minute I'm kind of to a certain extent dealing with the close-up on making sure that the key actors on stage are lit, and I haven't spotted that a piece of scenery is rolled on, and therefore there's a mess happening quite literally in my peripheral vision. So having a trusted second set of eyes across the lighting design, I think, is really important.
Well, that sort of leads me on to, I was going to ask both of you what you think the qualities and skills needed for an assistant or an associate really are, which would be interesting to hear from the point of view of somebody who employs them and the point of view of someone who is.
This is where we find Charlotte has none of the skills that I require. Oh, this is awkward.
Yeah.
You don't tick any of my information.
Absolutely.
As you can tell, we get on quite well.
This is why I'm the 3 on the list.
Yeah. Go on, Charlotte. Let's start with you then, and let's see if you're going to continue to work with Ben or not.
Hang on. I'm ready.
Oh gosh, now I'm on the spot. What do I think? I think it's definitely knowing when to speak is a huge one. I think that's something I completely picked up on the scheme, working with lots of different designers and programmers and learning about that relationship. And it's like don't interrupt is a big one. And I think knowing, I think it's taking everything in as well. Like part of that, that's, I think the way I sort of know what to do for Ben now is because I just pick stuff up of being like, okay, so that needs to be that way, or like this is how like the panto sidelight is, and like that kind of thing you just pick up because you notice details. And I think that's something I try and soak as much information in as I can in the room, and to like take a note of what's going on, like especially if you're calling spots as well. It's just sort of like, it sounds silly, looking up every now and again and seeing and listening to what they're doing. If it's a bit of a quiet spot for me calling, and like, because sometimes it's like that in tech, it's listening to what Ben and the programmer are talking about and what they're doing and what they're trying to achieve. And like you say, like, or like they're in the middle of doing something, but I have spotted like that's clipping the portal, so I just scribble that down. And it's like, but like I said, it's knowing when to speak. I'm not going to literally, they're in the middle of programming, go Joseph, and be like, just so you know, the there's a park up.
He was always doing that. It was relentless.
So, but it's like just taking note, and then like when there's a breather or like a tea break, to be like, if it hasn't already been spotted or whatever, be like, oh, do you want me to go deal with that? And then you don't have to think about it.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers the question at all. Maybe.
No, it does. It definitely does, because there's a global awareness, isn't there, of what's going on. It's big picture, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, like, there's obviously like you say, skills in terms of like plan drawing and stuff. But I think that's all of that thing can be developed. And like, if you get on well together, I think like all of that kind of works, and you can learn stuff as you go along as well. Yeah.
What about you, Ben? What do you look for? What would your job advert be?
Well, Charlotte's stolen all the good bits, but what I would, I suppose it's slightly being, not necessarily, chameleon's not necessarily the right word, but learning how to understand what is required. Yes, I can specify, of course I want someone, and I think when Charlotte and I first worked together, the brief was, can you call the follow spots? But an assistant who can then, well, firstly, exactly what Charlotte said in terms of reading the room, I think that's really important, like hearing the conversations. And sometimes if you're in the middle of programming something, and you know, whoever's assisting you can hear the rest, they might be able to also give you a tip off that the choreographer's mentioned something about the next bit involving lighting, or even just being someone who can field the questions from other, so that the production electrician or a choreographer or a costume designer doesn't come directly to me, but having an assistant who can kind of catch that person, so you're not suddenly pulled out of the moment when you're creating something, I think is really important. It's very much a relationship that is built on, is the more you work together, and certainly if you get on, and I think you can see that Charlotte and I certainly get on, but there's a trust there as well. So therefore, you know, it's tricky, isn't it? Like when you are in a hectic tech and you're building lighting, and you've got the pressure of the room kind of waiting for you, knowing that someone has, you know, quite literally got your back to keep an eye on what's happening, and at the same time, as Charlotte says, you know, I'm going to have to work for a tea break just to, you know, fix these cues from last time, because they're going to want to pick up and resolve it. So knowing, can I go and get you a cup of tea or a coffee or that sort of thing? I mean, there is a sort of a pastoral care, I guess, okay, you know, to assistants. I mean, basically she's a carer, is what I'm saying. But yeah, I think it's just generally supporting the work of the lighting designer. And as Charlotte says, skills like whether you choose to learn Vectorworks is a great. I mean, I draw my own plans generally, but that's not to say if I was busy, I might say to assistants, can you channel it up, or I've started it off, or can you just tidy it up because I've roughed it in. But again, you know, those skills can be learned, and I guess the same, Charlotte, is that chameleon-like quality, in that you sort of pick up how a lighting designer would draft a plot, and therefore whatever that sort of drafting style is, then adopt that so that it feels right for that designer, I guess, at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I sort of know what you want now, like it's or how it's laid out, and also because sometimes, you know, we've done quite a lot together, so it's like I know what layout it is and what font it is, and like how you just want.
Yeah, we laugh about what font, don't we? Fonts and style guides. We
do like a good font. So you know, this is all in this font for you now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think but like you say, I think that's, in a weird way, that's reading the room in a different way. It's like looking at the plan and going, right, this is what makes life easiest for Ben. And it's
interesting, actually, on the path to being a lighting designer, being an assistant as well. Just as we start talking about it, actually, a lot of those skills and the reading the room thing is exactly what you need as a lighting designer, so that you can get a sense of if you're in tech or you're lighting, you start to know the tell of a director if they're not quite sure whether they do a lip smacking noise before they're about to say, Ben, I'm not sure about this, or whatever. You start to learn people's tells, don't you, at the same time? So building on that skill as an assistant means that should you choose to take on the mantle of lighting designer yourself, you've got that sort of awareness of reading a room and understanding what it is. How do you fit into the puzzle to deliver that bit as well, and what are the important qualities you should push?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I know we joke about the font thing, but it can be really disconcerting when somebody goes to draw a plan for you or finishes it off and they do it in their own style, and you go, oh, that's so not what I'm used to looking at. And it does change your workflow, like in design mode, I think, sometimes, because you go, this isn't,
Comic Sans everywhere. No, absolutely
not. Yeah, I'll never draw a plan in Wingdings again, to be honest with you. I think Nathan's got a question for you, actually, if he's there. Nathan, you're up.
Hello.
Hiya.
Hi, Nathan.
From previous talks, there seems to be a correlation between assistants and associates taking on the role of programming as well. I'm just wondering whether you think that that's the way forward, or should an assistant really be separate to that process? It's not bogged down in trying to light the show, and then they can focus on other things, like you said, rooms or other things going on.
I can't imagine a situation where I'd place an assistant, given everything we're saying about the assistant maybe being in a supportive role that covers the whole sort of spectrum of lighting design. I think an assistant I wouldn't want as a programmer. I think there's an argument, I think maybe certainly in this country, whereby there aren't, in America you might have an assistant, maybe two assistants and an associate and a lighting designer, whereas here I think you can normally have one if you're lucky, unless you're on an enormous show. So I think to myself, having an assistant is really important for all the reasons we've just discussed, but perhaps a way to achieve an associate often is it comes from the person, the programmer who has created the show, who may not even begin as an associate, but has obviously been there as you've built the show, as you've created the aesthetic, that they have a detailed understanding of the inner workings of the design. So in terms of a path, it does often feel like saying, if I lit something and it had to be remounted. In fact, it exactly happened. I lit Annie UK tour years and years ago now, actually. But it got remounted last year and I wasn't available. So basically, Charlotte went along, essentially in the assistant associate role, and Stuart Cross, who had programmed it, went along in a sort of programming associate role, and together they created the show because Charlotte could come at it from a follow spot point of view, and then Stuart could come from a programming point of view. So I think that quite often the trajectory on my shows is that a programmer might become an associate, and an assistant would be the assistant, but I don't think I would have an assistant programmer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want me to be the assistant programmer either, because I don't know how it works.
It would be a disaster. But I think also because if the assistant was the programmer, then it would negate what we're saying, whereby Charlotte's able to wrangle an awful lot of other lighting elements whilst I'm lighting the show, whereas if the programmer was the assistant, then we'd be back to square one. So but it's not to say, I mean, in terms of, Charlotte's worked as associates for me as well, remounting productions as well, and having not come from a programming point of view. But I would say, yes, I would say a programmer would maybe be a programmer associate, but I don't think you'd have a programmer assistant.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you.
I wonder if we could move through the process slightly in terms of, let's start at the beginning. When in the process do you generally get an assistant on board?
Well, I mean, I guess to a certain extent, loosely, pretty much from the beginning, although their involvement, it depends on the scale of the show. Their involvement might not really kick in, I guess, until rehearsals.
Yeah.
It just depends. I suppose it would depend if the assistant, if, for example, we needed like lighting drawings being done, or whether there's so a lot of this comes down to, is there the money in the budget to pay someone, because no one should work for free. So therefore, It depends on what the budget is, but certainly as we enter rehearsals, I think having your assistants join into rehearsals, and maybe also deputise for you production meetings before then as well, because perhaps I can't get to one every single week.
Yeah.
But that's probably, what would you say, Charlotte? That's probably the average earliest time.
Yeah, and then I guess we just generally talk about it. Things happen and things progress with the design or whatever, and we just when we catch up anyway, we'd be like, oh, this is what's happening now, and so you have a general idea of how the show's progressing and everything, and generally get on the rehearsal notes and see how things progress in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure most people do nowadays, but I mean, I have all my production folders are all in Dropbox. So Charlotte gets invited to the whatever show it is production folder, the minute she's on board on the project, which is not to say I expect us to read it all, but she is available there, scripts and whether there's demo pieces of music and at the same time rehearsal videos can go into there. So there's a resource there, which means that Charlotte, whoever's assisting, would be involved from that point. But I guess, the real thing, I guess, is attending production meetings or rehearsals, and then on to the theatre, really.
Yeah. And do you, in terms of those rehearsals, do you prefer an assistant to go with you or instead of you, or is it just what matches up schedule-wise?
It will be in the initial times, probably an assistant would go in my absence. So if we say it's a 4-week rehearsal period, so the first 3 weeks, quite often it would, I'd try to attend, or if for some reason, there's often a weekly production meeting. So if I couldn't attend it, then I might say to whoever's assisting me, can you go to the production meeting and so on. But I think sitting together by the time you get to studio runs are really useful, because at that point, if we're talking about follow spots, for example, I can lean over to Charlotte and say, just watch out, because this bit is going to be really complex. I know in my mind, and I'll, with a devilish gringo, you're going to have to earn your money in this section. And just, to sort of comment about bits and going to the input, that assistant might have, being able to bounce ideas as well about how you might, with the follow spots, work something, or just explain the technicalities, like on Joseph, the booms that track in the wings or something like that, just to say, just so you know, here's another piece of information that you can just have in the back of your mind when you're formulating what we're going to need to do when we get into tech.
Yeah.
But that's for rehearsals are probably the big one.
Yeah, and then I guess for me, when you're seeing a studio run, it's after you've seen that run and taken a bunch of notes and we've had that conversation, is then going away and writing the plot.
Yeah. Exactly, and I don't really. I mean, we'll talk, but I'm not in any way particularly. Other than if I know there's a specific sequence where it's going to be a quick fire, whatever, or if I have in my mind certain moments, everything else is kind of. We might talk very broadly in terms of what we think the temperature of the scene might be, so that Charlotte can think about what colours might be offered up in spots at that point. But that's probably as far as that. But then we've got Charlotte sometimes on Joseph, she was parachuted into rehearsal where we suddenly got a rehearsal note. There was a section at the top of Act 2 which was this like a shadow play section, and all of a sudden it came with challenges, and that the Palladium's not particularly deep, so in order to have a backlit cloth and a shadow big enough and all of those things, it was essentially, and we wanted the light to be controllable, so we didn't just want something blasting light out, so we wanted a focusable light wide enough to light a surface and create a shadow of a certain height in a very limited depth. So in order to do that, when the rehearsal came up that they were going to do it, all of a sudden Charlotte was deployed. We looked at the ground plan of what the depths needed to be, and then Charlotte, you had to sort of go on an adventure, didn't you, to go and get a light from.
I did, yeah.
You were like, was it the Old Vic or somewhere you ended up stealing one from?
From the Young Vic, yeah.
Oh, the Young Vic,
and
right.
then thankfully rehearsals were like only down the road, but it was sunny and wasn't raining, and I literally went to the Young Vic and was like, I'm here to pick up a light, and they're like, here it is, with a bulb as well. So I got my Cracnell and my bulb and literally like walked down the street to the rehearsal.
It was a great look. But that was in my absence. It was really important because I could have just got something sent to them, but having someone with a lighting design eye to look at it and take on all those parameters, it would be pointless for them to get the best shadows in the world with acres of space, knowing that in the theatre that wouldn't be the case. So we needed to make sure realistically all the relationships between the projection surface and the light source and the actors were all there, and having someone who could potentially say, if you take half a pace towards a projection surface, the shadow will be the size that you need it to be, and things like that, which meant that we were getting ahead a little, so that when we hit it in tech, we knew what the relationships were and we knew that it would work, so we wouldn't have this disappointing moment in tech. So that moment was invaluable.
Yeah. And I think it helped also because it just helps the going, like you have the plan and then you're doing the markup and you're like, no, yeah, it goes here. Unfortunately, because that was so much, like you say, it was because of the space and everything. It's like, this light goes here.
Yeah, that's the one place.
How the shadow works from that.
Well, that was it. Like so many, when it comes to shadows and all of that, we were at the limits of what physics would allow. So that was it, really. We needed that. And that meant that they had a realistic expectation of what they were going to see in the theatre, and that there wasn't going to suddenly be a really awkward moment at the start of Act 2 tech where we couldn't deliver the effect that everyone had imagined.
Yeah, that is tricky. And this is in no way a loaded question, just putting that out there now. But from an assistant, do you think there is any artistic input at this stage, at rehearsal stage, or are they predominantly there to learn the show, to deal with things like spots?
Well, because Charlotte, I think the thing is, because Charlotte and I have done lots of shows together, and Charlotte understands now how I work, I think we would just have to talk about things, I guess, and maybe bounce ideas backwards and forwards. I mean, as Charlotte said about the whole reading the room thing, I think Charlotte probably has lots of thoughts which she filters in, but knows perhaps when to mention them, not, when I'm sat next to a director at the beginning of a run or something. No, I think I welcome ideas as much as I welcome them from a movie like a lighting programmer or whoever. So it's just finding that moment, but certainly the more that you can discuss, and I'm really open about sort of talking about, this is what I'm thinking, and then other people can kind of bounce ideas off you.
Yeah. Do you feel the same, Charlotte? Do you send little texts being like, I've had a thought about XYZ that I saw today?
I don't know, but then like Ben says, we tend to just chat. Like we'll like sometimes like we'll have gone to a run or whatever and we'll chat afterwards, or there'll be a break and you'll have a cup of tea and you'll be like, oh, what about this, what about that? And then like, I don't know, sometimes we just end up on the phone having a chat about it, and then like it's certainly informal, I think, and it may be that shows come and go and there's none of that at all. I think it just depends on the situation. I mean, we certainly don't finish up a run and say, okay, now Charlotte, I need your ideas, please. Yeah, I mean, there's times where I think to myself, maybe I should ask Charlotte for an idea because I don't really have any. But
yeah, it's when directors do that thing where they go, so what are your thoughts? You need to just start being like, Charlotte, what do you think?
I hate that. That's the worst thing, when you see a run and the director says, so what do you think?
Yeah, awful.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's blown me away.
Tears. I'm in tears here.
I always hate that. But yeah, maybe I'll just start deferring to Charlotte. Charlotte, what are your thoughts on this?
A moment of panic for sure.
That would definitely throw me. I'd like, you guys there, I'll be like, don't know what to say now. Blank. I have no words.
But I might say that when we're lighting something, or if I'm not sure about something, I'll say, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Do you think that's pulling focus too much, or do you think this is, that effect I've just created is too outrageous? So I'm really enjoying it, but that's because I'm having fun creating it. But is it really right for this moment, or something like that? Being a sounding board, I guess, is a really important thing. Yeah,
and it can be a very, especially sort of in some of those regional venues where you're working with an in-house team rather than your own team. It can be a really lonely job, and that sounding board is a really important thing to get you through sometimes, I think.
No, Charlotte was an associate to me on an opera in Spain a couple of years ago, and that was particularly lonely, wasn't it? Because you had I wasn't there to begin with, but you were by yourself and with like language barriers and all sorts.
Yeah, I mean, there was only 2 people that spoke English and they weren't in the lighting department. So that was interesting there was definitely an afternoon where we spent 3 hours translating the fact that the channeling was 1-to-1. Which I did not get on the first go of us trying to talk to each other. Bless them. They were, and also like it was like not awful, but like they were so lovely. Like the people were like all just genuinely lovely people, but we just didn't know how to talk to each other. So, but that was definitely a bit lonely as well.
It was. I remember
the schedule and like lifestyle is completely different. So like we do, like compared to being here, like you do what I felt was like not a lot, and then you'd go on a 2-hour dinner break. But it's just the way they do things, and like the tech process was just elongated over a few more weeks than it would be here. We'd get it all done in a week, and I think the schedule on that was like 3 weeks. So they were just like,
It was a long time, because I joined you. It was around Christmas. It's all everything seems to come back to Panto at the moment. It was in the middle of doing Panto, and I'd finished one hour between them, and I came out for a couple of days just for I think maybe a couple of stage and orchestra rehearsals or something. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen you so pleased to see me. It was like someone to talk to.
Yeah, tricky.
It was, but it is. I agree. It's certainly when you're, it's tough. Yeah, when you're working those regional theatres where perhaps you and your whole team haven't shipped in, so therefore you're not all in a hotel and so on. So at the end of the day, everyone goes back to their normal family lives. And actually, if you've got an assistant, I mean, yeah, Charlotte and I have spent a lot of time in the Curry House opposite Leicester Curve before, for example.
Yeah, and Charlotte, from your point of view, in terms of like learning the show, if you think that you're there to deal with spots, how much rehearsal do you need to go right? This little twirly bit here, I really need to focus on. Like, how long is that process for you?
I guess it's like knowing all of the notes or chats we've already had beforehand, and then I will always write a plot before tech. Like I would never go into a tech without a plot. Just also because the way I know Ben likes his shows to be spotted now, but I think for me it just makes a lot of sense. What's really useful is that Ben will always have a cue list going into tech, and so I will take that cue list and I will put as many cues to the called cues as I can, because I think then like we're all synced up, we're all together, all of these things will happen at the same time, and then I will put in visual cues or DSM cues if needed at any point, and then I've slightly forgotten your question.
How long does it take to learn a show with your spot hat on?
Yeah. And then so it's already looking at it in rehearsals as well, and then going and writing that plot. And then by the time I finish that, like I will take about a day to do that, just so I've got it all synced into my head. Like I'll be doing it, watching a recording of the rehearsal I'll have seen, all of that synced to the cues, and sorting all of that out. So I'll already have like, this is how it's going to be already in my head. And then I can go straight in knowing exactly what I want to start telling the spots. And especially if it's like you say, there's a complicated sequence, I've already worked it out so far. And then I can, or already have the words to explain it, if that makes sense. And I can start that process, and then we'll deal with changes as and when they come.
You're quite often also have like a pre-tech spot meeting and maybe reference rehearsal videos and to watch sections as well, don't you?
Yes, yeah, because I mean, like on Joseph last year, I forgot about that. That's right. We sat and watched a rehearsal video with the plot I'd already written, just because they weren't in costume. That was why we did that, because I was like, you know what they are.
Yeah.
So especially with interchangeable children in that as well, I was like, it was going like, yeah, it's this kid in the video at the moment, and again, like this afternoon it's this kid, but in the afternoon it's going to be in the evening it's going to be a different kid, but they would always be in this position.
The challenge with Joseph was exactly that, because we had teams of children in that, so we didn't have much tech time, but then we had afternoon and evening tech sessions, so we would do 15 minutes of the show in the afternoon with one team and then the same 15 minutes in the evening. So it meant that we could revisit sections several times, but we never had much time to actually do anything in those sections. They'd fly past us once and then they'd fly past us again. So it was absolutely, and because they needed to work quickly, they decided that they weren't going to tech in costume. So that added another level of complexity to it. So Charlotte, I think you did quite a lot of sort of spot retrospective and also advanced spot meetings to get them up to speed.
Yeah, and also like how I write a cue sheet is just how I write a cue sheet in a way. So I like will be like, this is what this means. And are you okay with that, or is it too complicated? And that's something you sort of figure out over the years, and you figure out generally what a universal F means frost or fade out or like whatever to certain people. And then like now I know it's I'll use F for frost, and that's easiest to sort of that kind of thing. And communicate, like just knowing, like even just telling them, like, because sometimes like even the frames are in the color frames are in the spots before they've got there, you know, and it's going and that color's in this frame and that kind of thing. And explaining who characters are and all of that sort of thing. And I guess also sometimes when we're in tech now, it's something I've learned to do is when it's sort of quiet for a moment, say for lighting or whatever, and we'll pause for a moment because they're going to space a number or whatever, but you know that the next sequence is going to be like, and then all of this stuff is going to happen for follow spots. I will be like, sit there and like narrate it and be like, this is what is going to happen in 15 minutes time. And these are the people, even though they're stood there now, this is what's going to happen. And then like you've got a good chance at getting it nearly there before it happens, which is
invaluable, because in the instance, as I say, like that show where you might only get one crack at it, or maybe, you know, it happened twice, but the more that Charlotte can deliver what I think we should be able to see, then the more advanced we are, because then I can respond to it, and whether I think there's any level adjustments or colors or stuff, but knowing that there's something there is better than like seeing this kind of car crash of stuff all happening at the same time, because there's nothing for me, then there's very little I can comment on. So you know, that prep is using the time wisely, again, reading the room, seeing what's happening, and knowing that you've got a bit of time where you can prepare them to, prepare the follow spots to move forward, I think is invaluable.
And I mean, when you get to the venue and things are fitting up and stuff, there's a slight hiatus in assistant land between end of rehearsals and tech. What happens then, Charlotte? What are some of the helpful pre-focus things, I suppose you'd say, that you undertake?
I don't know, because sometimes in a weird way that's depending on the days I'm on site, which is all to do with like budget and all of that kind of thing as well, in a weird way, because sometimes I will just turn up the morning we're going to start tech, like depending on the show. I think on something like Joseph, we had that we did a lot of previs, and we had a little office, and we all sort of, that was like the first time you felt like you were like a company that worked together in a little office, wasn't it? Like the three of us were there, and so I got to do lots of things, like, you know, sometimes I'm a bit old-fashioned and I like a cue in a script written in pencil, and like that was something I did. And there's a lot of cues in Joseph, but they're all in my script. Because sometimes it's like good to, even if I don't use it that often, sometimes it's good to see how it lays out on a page and how quickly you're going to get through that page of dialogue or whatever when you're calling it. Because sometimes, like, I'm totally guilty of it, and I probably still do it sometimes, but I try not to like prep someone too early for a cue. Like sometimes you can be like getting them to stand by for a cue, and then it doesn't happen for another 5 minutes. And like sometimes in theatre that's a very long time if you're a follow spot operator waiting for that cue. So I try not to do that, and so that's like having the keys in a script helps me do that. So I do that as often as I can, but sometimes it's not always the time. I'm trying to think of anything else, but it's all sort of flows, like I said, like, you know, I'll go to that rehearsal, I'll then start writing my plot, and then we're kind of into tech.
I guess there might be there's occasions maybe during a focus session of bringing up channels and depending on, again, it depends on venue to venue in terms of what crew you've got, but there's times like if we've got, I don't know, a little console or either a remote or an ion or something on a flight case on stage, then I think having someone who's got the plan and is bringing up the next channel, and that I don't have to think about those numbers as well, is really useful.
Or I'll like cross lights off on a
exactly plan,
that kind of thing, like be like, right, we've done LX1 now, so that's all ticked off.
To get a sense. And again, being that if there's, for whatever, if I'm focusing and we realize that there's an issue, maybe the lens is wrong for a light, or we're gonna have to make an adjustment, then actually I can carry on again, and Charlotte can field that issue with other electricians, or if we're if you're focusing on a stage and there's scenery at a point, getting to the point where you have to move a piece of scenery to get to the next bar or whatever it may be. Just trying to help, I suppose, us as a lighting department be efficient, and the more that you can have like a dual-pronged approach, then I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's about keeping it rolling and being really useful. I used to describe it as going around behind the lighting designer with a little dustpan and brush, being like, "Yep, great, that's done. Okay, brilliant, fantastic." And
that's kind of, and then there's also moments, I guess, when we're, Charlotte, we might be plotting and Charlotte sat there doing some notes, and there come a certain point, I'm like, oh, I can't find anyone, and then Charlotte goes, "Do you want me to go down there and stand for you?" And again, just to help out, can I,
There's definitely there's a lot of, like, we were discussing this the other day, there's a lot of photos of me stood on a stage, like being at the desk and at the office and on the phone.
There's a whole series of Where's Charlotte Now, and like in sort of lab coats from Young Frankenstein, because that was particularly the opening of Young Frankenstein. Everyone was in white lab coats, so to try to get the balance right, it's just a nightmare. And because it's a musical, you're wanting to use lots of color saturation, but at the same time you want the lab coats to look crisp, and of course you're playing with the fact that it's already all doing a kind of zhuzhy sort of pink, warm, red pink bias number, but then all of a sudden the lab coats start to feel a bit green in the open white instead, and it's that sort of all these tricks. So there are quite a few pictures of Charlotte stood Charlotte, the people who were in the lab coats were slightly taller than Charlotte, is perhaps the way of saying it. So it was like Charlotte is swamped by these big white lab coats. It was hilarious.
I'm just
hilarious and adorable in equal measure.
Default focus is this.
Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah.
Like, obviously, a bit more than height than me, like my hand.
Yeah. I love that. Lots of people put it on their head. You're like, I know I need a bit more than that. That's
so again, it's just finding where you're needed, I guess. So identifying that the lighting designer is struggling could really do with someone to stand, and if we can't find anyone on stage who can do it, then just nipping down to help out again to keep the process going.
You don't. That's like, that's definitely part of it. It's like you don't want it to take time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like when you're trying to do something well and like carefully, like in moments like that, it's when you have the time to really finesse it, like Ben saying with the colour on the coats and everything. And although for me it was 20 minutes stood on stage in a coat, which felt like a long time, it was valuable work for him.
Yeah, and it saves time later down the line, doesn't it? It's maximising sort of what's the productivity, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah, absolutely.
A huge thing. And when you get to the tech, then how much conversation is there between the two of you, or do you just sort of get on with your respective bits and then talk in a break, or how does it work?
I think probably we don't talk very much. I think we just, because I suppose for that very reason that you're trying to avoid that bottleneck, that you don't want to, you just want to crack on and apart. And I'll certainly just keep going, and then maybe if we occasionally throw in comments about too bright, too dark, whatever, but basically Charlotte goes with it, and then we review it at the end, I think.
And just filter in the notes and that kind of thing. Like we said before, actually it would be bad if we talk too much, because it would mean we're not on the same page about what should be happening. Yeah,
exactly. It's so that as we can be as efficient as possible. So therefore, a lot of my conversation is with the lighting programmer or discussing things with the director. So I don't really speak to there's no need for me to speak to the follow spot operators other than to say a cheery hello and thank you at the end of the day. That's Charlotte takes that burden away from me and manages it, so therefore I can just filter like occasional notes. But because we worked a lot and because we've seen rehearsals and had those conversations prior to it, actually Charlotte just kind of runs with it and it, delivers that aspect of the lighting design.
Yeah, and I mean, now you look back at it, like you've obviously done all these shows together. You, Ben, must look back and go, how did I used to do this before an assistant? Because it's such an invaluable person now.
Occasionally, I still do shows for whatever, not by choice, but I'll do shows where it's just me, and it's suddenly a really you start the tech and I'm sitting down and all comfortable, and then I think, oh shit, there's no one to call follow spots. What am I going to do? And then panic immediately. Yeah. And then say to the follow spots, just cover everyone. It is tricky. I mean, I guess it's when I have to do it by myself, then absolutely I kind of do the same thing, in that I'll mark up my script and maybe stick a couple of columns on one side for each spot, and then figure out roughly who I think's following. And I'll produce the same as I produce a lighting cue sheet in advance of tech. I'll produce a follow spot cue sheet, but it does mean that it increases the workload if I'm having to then update follow spot cue sheets and so on. It's it makes the job a lot harder. So I think Charlotte and all the work of an assistant is invaluable.
There's a couple of times when there's been situations where I've just done a spot sheet for you for a show I've not really seen after it.
Yes, you did.
Go to a rehearsal and write a spot sheet because of just like you say, like circumstance and budget and that kind of thing, and then it's just an easy start to something to go with that you haven't had to think about.
Yeah, exactly, because at that point, especially on shows that have a shorter rehearsal period, so much that sort of influences the lighting design and the cue list happens so late. Like, for example, you might see a run at the very last minute if you're lucky, but if that runs on a Saturday and you're fitting up from Sunday, then how much time do I have to personally to process creating a follow spot cue sheet and doing all that? Well, I just don't really if I'm going to sleep, because there just isn't enough. There aren't enough minutes in the day. So yeah, absolutely. Asking Charlotte, here's a video, or come to rehearsal, or here's a video, here's my cue sheet. Can you do what you normally do other than not show up? It's sort of. And as we said, we don't talk anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah, so it's good. Like I was there.
Yeah. Charlotte, I want to talk about calling spots, and I don't mean I don't want you to give us the 3-hour lecture of it, but I wonder if we talk a lot about calling it, but what is that? What are the things you're saying to people? What actually is calling spots?
It sounds really silly. In a really basic way, it is going, we need this person to be in this light, in this colour, at this time with this cue. And in its really basic form, but then it's in a weird way all the things that go with that. So it's just like picking out the people, it's the size of the head and shoulders, or a full body, or all of that kind of thing. You got frosting, hard edge, all of that kind of thing, what the feel for that bit of the piece is. I don't know, I think the way I sort of approach it now is I like to think like we're a little team, and so as much as I can get to know those people in that little session at the minute, and know what can I do for you to make it easier, because there's my way of saying something, but that might not necessarily work for someone else. They might misunderstand you or whatever, and I've really tried to work on my dialogue so that everyone's gets what I mean, and I don't get sometimes there's a way of I just say something and I'm no one else understands what I mean there, do we? Let me try that again and I will explain it again, kind of thing. But also finding new ways of explaining things, because sometimes especially if you a mover show, you've done it with one set of spot operators that completely understood what you meant, and then they're completely fresh eyes to a show, they're what are you on about? Because they weren't in that tech session that we did in Newcastle 2 months ago, because they were in London, so it's things like that.
There's always a test, isn't there, when it's the first move of a show, be it something transferring to London or something going on tour, but it's what information I suppose there's a real skill, isn't there, in making sure that the information, that everything's on that sheet and as clear as possible, because spot operators grow for show during tech. They have the luxury of however many, depending on your producer, anywhere between 1 and 20 sessions of tech. So they learn the show. So it's just making sure that anything they know is absolutely on those sheets, because you suddenly realize that when you jump to new operators, all of that sort of learned knowledge and the fact that they've had all those tech sessions is now gone. So it's just making sure that you absolutely have that information on the cue sheet.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I try to do, no matter how complicated it is to make it as easy as possible. And that's definitely something I've learned, to articulate better and in as fewer words as possible in a cue sheet. I was saying to Ben, we moved Legally Blonde to Monaco a few years ago, and I picked up the cue sheet and was how much, there's paragraphs in these boxes of information. And it was fine because before the show only stayed in Leicester and they had the same operators all the time. We'd done tech together. So they were just sort of yeah, we know what she meant. But then giving that to people also whose first language was French and not English as well. And all of that kind of thing definitely made me go revise that cue list before it went instead of just printing off the old sheet.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely making it as easy as possible. And I think if you do that, sorry, I've just seen what Dan's put in the chat. Dan spotted on Wedding Singer for us in February when we took it to Wembley Troubadour, and it's true, there was a really complicated bit in the show, and I was literally stood there drawing diagrams on a piece of paper to him and the other operator, being like, this is what I mean when I'm trying to describe this diagonal thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, that is complicated. Yeah.
But it's just trying to make it as simple as it can for anyone to then come along and pick up, and hopefully it's as smooth as it can be for a new operator as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how do you we've all had a situation where you rock up and you realize that your spot operator isn't necessarily what you hoped they would be in skill. What happens then? How do you deal with that? What's your top tip for gently encouraging better spotting?
Always, what can I do to help you?
Yeah.
Because I think if you shut down communication and being like, but this is how I want it and this is how it's going to be, kind of thing, you're not gonna. It's not going to help the situation. You're not going to improve upon it. They're not going to trust you if you don't listen to them. So I think as much as I can help them, then I will. And there's I've done things on shows where one of the operators was like, after all the changes in a day, I just need to see it on a sheet of paper as I'm getting the tube home. And I'll be like, fine. Then at the end of each day, I'll print you a new cue sheet and you'll come down and get it, and they go read it on the way home. And then, because if that's going to make tomorrow easier for him, then that's what I need to do. So I think that's something I've definitely learned over the years, is doing that as much as possible. You're never going to get good work out of someone if they don't trust that you're going to be nice and be kind, or they need to know that they can go, I'm really finding this difficult to you. You can be like, right, then let's try and make that happen, because sometimes it's the balance of the weight of the spot, and we've definitely been on shows where it's right, okay, production electrician, I need more weights on that spot because we need to balance it better for this person, and all of that kind of thing as well. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, what happens with you in that situation, Ben? Do you have to do a sort of awkward chat with Charlotte where you go, oh, what's going on? Is that a them thing, or is it a I need to be clearer thing, or what?
Often it's not as calm as that, but yes. No, joking aside, yeah, I mean, say, have we got a problem, as it were? Is there an issue upstairs? And then absolutely, I suppose it's identifying exactly as Charlotte says, is that how can we support that person? And is it? I mean, I suppose there can be two types of problem follow spots. One's that people who don't really want to be there, therefore that's a different thing, I think, to deal with. But someone who absolutely wants it as their job and they just need support. So I completely agree in terms of the support. That, I mean, I know 100% that Charlotte will give the care and attention to ensuring that they get the information and they can rehearse those moments. And the more we can do that, and if Charlotte can filter to me that there was a difficult, quick moment in the tech, then what I'll try to do is catch the director and say, is it okay? Or there's a really fast sequence coming up. Is it okay if we get the rehearsal pianist to play it at half tempo, and we'll get the actors to hold up their hands one by one? And I can help sort of broker that moment so that we can say, look, this is, which we know that ultimately would be good. So I think together, working as a team, what support can we give it? Is it that Charlotte's going to give all the information as clear as possible, which is fantastic? Is there a technical issue? Is there a problem with comms, start technical rehearsals? I mean, wow. I mean, I can't tell you how many times there's been communication issues that the follow spots are on the wrong intercom ring or whatever the case may be. But, can't hear the DSM or can't hear Charlotte. That's a particularly exciting one. But all of those things, so that the more that we can support them, the better. So can we give them more rehearsal? Because ultimately we'll want the show to look as good as possible, and as Charlotte says, is you're going to get the best of that by looking after people, and just say, as long as they aren't the other type of operator who doesn't want to be there, in which case then perhaps they shouldn't be there. You will absolutely support them so that they do their best work, and therefore we are delivering our best work as well as the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think so, something that I have definitely learned, which I think I think helps the operators is my mind's gone blank now, and I totally had this answer ready because I knew I wanted to say it. It's so annoying. What was I going to say? Oh, it's about oh yes. So one of definitely the big things I overlearned in tech is to know when I need some time. It's like if Ben gives me a note and I know now if it's going to take me 10 seconds to tell someone that, and it's a super easy fix, or whether I need to move cue stacks about and talk them through it and be like, now this is what's going to happen. And now I have a better judgment of time of being like, yeah, I can totally do that for you, Ben, but it's going to take me 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And then
that's cool. And that, for us saying we don't talk to each other in tech, actually that's the really important thing, because at that point then, because I guess as a lighting designer as well, you're like, you're the front person of the team, so to a certain extent, if you can then say to a director, look, this, just we're just reworking this sequence, so if the choreographer needs a quick 5 minutes to do a cleanup on that, that's great. Charlotte's just doing that. At the same time, I'm going to quickly nip through some of my notes that I've got as well, and it's that ongoing communication. And therefore, and if there is a problem with a follow spot, like if Charlotte says, oh, just we've had like the colour magazines fallen off the front of a follow spot or something, so it's all over the place. We haven't got colours. Well, I'll just mention that to the director and say, look, no, don't be concerned, but that this is the situation. So then I'm not going to get a concerned director wondering why I'm making these outrageous choices with follow spotting or whatever it might be. So communication is important, and that information can flow down. Like say, Charlotte will be able to speak to the operators. If there's a problem, we can deploy a production electrician or someone to go and solve a practical issue, or Charlotte will deal with an issue in terms of information, and at the same time then I'll make sure that those in the room who need to know what the score is. And we take it from there.
Yeah. And when the two of you leave at dinner time or at the end of the day or whenever it is that you get a chance to step out, are you two people who are very good at leaving it at the door, or do you spend the whole time talking work and tech?
I think we'll decompress a bit, but then probably talk about not necessarily specifically to do with work, just to do with the day, I guess.
Yeah.
There's I think I'd say like half and half sometimes. Like you say, you do sometimes leave talking about what just happened, because especially if it's like something complicated and you're trying to figure it out, or there's something that needs to happen tomorrow or something like that. But then after that, I think it's just chat, isn't it?
I think once the gin kicks in, then we talk less about the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You don't even remember what you were talking about. There's a couple of questions here. Ian's got a question for you. He's going to appear, hopefully. Ian, over to you.
Hi, Ben. I'm just wondering, because of the different shows that you've let, like musicals and panto and stuff like that, which one do you prefer? Do you prefer doing panto, or do you prefer lighting full-blown musicals?
I think I kind of enjoy. I think what I do is because it's relatively, what I do is is quite varied. I think I like mixing it up and the various different things. I mean, in a way, a pantomime is like a full-blown musical, but quite often just not in the time that you get to create a full-blown musical, I guess. Obviously there's stylistic choices which are different between those, but I mean, panto is a lot of fun, and I guess perhaps you can be more outrageous with the lighting. But then in saying that, with something like Legally Blonde, or Joseph especially, when we were nothing but outrageous because of the pastiche style of all those numbers. So I think I kind of enjoy it all, and even down to lighting sort of smaller plays, and there's the opera we've done. I think a mixture of it all is good, and I really enjoy that. And I think then the different styles sort of help inform the way you might approach a musical, using maybe an operatic style or a more commercial music style that you might adopt in a pantomime because it has pop songs in it, or so on. So I guess I just like lighting design is probably what the short answer.
Yeah. Nathan's got another one for you. Nathan, if you're there, it's your moment.
Hello, I'm back again. We mentioned earlier on that in America you said that like assistants, associates are more common. So I was just wondering how in the UK can we change producers' minds or ways of working to encourage more roles of assistants? Probably a question bigger than this meeting, but how can we change the?
Yeah, I don't actually know what the answer to that is. I mean, I fought for it, and it's something that I'll try on all significant, it's who pays the assistant, I guess, because there's times certainly where it just comes out of my feet because I know that I'm doing a number of back-to-back shows, and in order to get by and to make that work, I'm going to need just more people, which is fine, and I balance that by the fact that the income is such that I can offset the cost of an assistant against that. But with larger shows like a Young Frankenstein or a Joseph or something like that, then I'll absolutely fight for an assistant. And I think certainly there's a number of producers now who just accept that that's just part of the deal. But it isn't really a standard thing here. I mean, other than on the larger shows. And I guess my understanding of how the US works is there's a lot of like the part of the learning trajectory is from graduating as a lighting graduate, and then maybe probably might have done an internship during that point, and then you're an assistant. But certainly when I look at some of those larger Broadway shows, and it seems that there's maybe there's a follow spots assistant, and then an assistant lighting designer, and an associate. I don't actually really know how those people are paid. I mean, they obviously are paid, but I don't know who. Do the producers, Roy? Do you know, or Charlotte?
I know vaguely. Like, if you're an associate, you're on the books the entire run to deal with anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which would be amazing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely done a lot more through the producer side of it, I think. Yeah,
because it wouldn't. As I say, there's times where I'll employ an assistant, but then there's other times that I'll as part of my contractual negotiation, it will be that there needs to be an assistant involved in this production, and that's dealt with that way. It sort of varies, but it isn't. Unfortunately, it just isn't such a big thing here, and I don't really know what the solution is.
Well, I think part of what you do is the right thing, though, is to keep asking, and and keep saying, yeah, and this is who I'm going to need to do this job. I mean, like, I don't know, it's my job, so I have that part of me where I'm like, fight for us, but like not in terms of like necessarily Ben, but I just think in general, like, the industry needs to be a bit more accepting about it. You know, like, designers get their associates and assistants, and costume have got their associates and assistants, and it definitely happens more. And I guess the associate thing is especially with shows like larger shows that are likely to be duplicated worldwide or so on, then associates are important because the producer needs to keep an eye on when there's another version of the show in Japan or something, and they can't rely on the lighting designer's availability to do it. That's just not going to be realistic. So I suppose they start to think further ahead that having this associate on board, and as you say, on the books from all the way through, means that they're protected from the point of view of having a lighting creative available. And the assistant thing is exactly that. I just keep asking, and it's, as I say, with certain producers I work with quite a lot, they just expect it now. So I think they're at the point where their general managers will put a budget line in for an assistant, and that's just a given.
Yeah. It's also, I think there's also a real thing about managing expectation, isn't there? Because I find that I quite often, if somebody turns around and goes, of course we don't have the money for that. You go, okay then, well we might have to try and do this with no spots then. And sort of you almost go for the scare tactic, and they suddenly go, oh, well, no, hold on, because that's, and I go, well, I just don't have the headspace to do all of that. You want to open this thing in a week, say, in the middle of nowhere somewhere, and you go, so unfortunately you're going to have to meet me in the middle, or we can't actually deliver what you want us to at scale and at quality.
There's an interesting, we all talk about, what we're doing in our sort of post, like in the middle of COVID and all of that. And I think, I don't know about you guys, but my diary was sort of sitting relatively busy for this year, and not quite back to back, but in nice orderly fashion. And all of those shows now have all shunted themselves into next year and are all still floating around and vying for positions. But what's we know what's going to happen is that I'll end up having to open 3 musicals in a week or something. And the only way that producers are going to have to deal with it is by shows making sure that there are assistants and associates, because maybe I can only be there for the tech of a show, or that it will just, unfortunately, which is through no fault of anyone's, that's just going to be the circumstance, because producers aren't going to want to suddenly be finding other lighting designers, and I think you'll struggle to do that anyway, because everyone's will probably be in a similar boat as shows move and clash and so on. So I think there could be an opportunity to get more people as assistants and associates on shows just because of people's availability.
Yeah. Well, there's stuff. This December, there's a thing that I got asked to do that they said, right, well, we're going to give you a programmer from in-house. You can't have an assistant. You can't have any of these things. It's just you. And I said, okay, well, with the greatest will in the world, if I suddenly get a tickly throat and I have to isolate, who knows the show, just to check. And they suddenly went, oh, well, I suppose, what, yes, okay, I see your point. You know, and so I think there is, as you say, there is a whole world where this could potentially strengthen the case for it, and go, well, that person can, they are the second brain, aren't they? That's.
Yeah, we can't just be individuals, because exactly that, because if one of us, worst case scenario, if one of us was to become ill or have to isolate or whatever, then who's sitting in the hot seat?
Yeah.
To do that, and especially if it's a show where you haven't got an assistant and you haven't got a programmer who works with the lighting designer, you've just got a house programmer who's maybe then all people have got is probably a lighting plan and a groups list, and that's that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when you look at the future proofing of Ben, I mean, there must be a little part of your brain goes, right, well, what if Charlotte's not available, or what if Charlotte moves on to her own stuff, or, you know, are you nervous about? You sort of built up. I'm sorry, I've rambled. You built up maximum productivity together, and then you're going to have to go back to the start and teach somebody new your way, as it were.
I guess so. I mean, because of things overlapping, I work with other people as well. Sorry, this isn't news to you, Charlotte, is it? This could be awkward. I work with other people as well, and some of that is, in terms of future proofing, and the same with programs and stuff, is when I look at a diary, it wouldn't be right to have the same programmer and the same assistant on every single show. You know, firstly, because we'll all get fed up with each other and fall out like married couples. But also at the point where shows get remounted or there are slight overlaps, then it makes sense to have different team members. So there's a benefit to working with a couple of assistants, so that there's always the possibility that one of you will be available to do something if something comes out of the woodwork. It helps solve burnout, and also it means that there are other people who work with me and who know it, and you can filter new people into the team and move on. And then when Charlotte is unavailable, because Charlotte doesn't just work with me, she works with the lighting designers, so she's not always available anyway, but there's someone else who can take that role at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a question here from Ellen, which is a great question that I think we're probably all wondering. So go on, Ellen.
Hello. So my question is, what's the best way to approach a lighting designer that you like, that you would want to assist? Is there a certain conduct or like an unspoken way of which you're supposed to approach someone?
I think I'd just drop them an email or something. I think it's probably the best. If you've got Charlotte and I met because we were working together on a show, but I think just to begin with, when I think a chap called Andrew Exeter
I went to college with him. I was expecting you to say his name. I went to college with him.
There we go. You can now mark off Andrew Exeter on your Ben Cracnell bingo. But Andrew just wrote to me and came and he observed, I think, I can't remember, he watched me doing a show, and then it sort of went from there. So I think that's the best thing, is just reach out to people. And I mean, now's a great time because there's a lot of lighting designers, sat at home twiddling their thumbs. So, and just say, can I come and, shadow you at some point, or can we just meet for a coffee, for a chat or whatever? And if people are in tech, and I'm sure when things, I used to often have people come and like sit in a tech session or watch a dress rehearsal or so on. And I think at the minute that will be tricky, because I think producers are trying to limit the number of people in theatres, and understandably so because of social distancing. But as things begin to settle, that will be back on the cards, and then that's just a great way to see people's work, and who knows, you could take it from there.
And I think it's just generally just being nice, because I think I sent Ben an email afterwards being like, you know what, it was just really nice to work with you on Panto, and it was really good fun, and thank you for the offer of shadowing you, that kind of thing. And then it sort of went from there.
And I think and being nice is being nice and being personable, and I think that's it. Those initial inroads of saying, let's grab a coffee, or come and sit at the tech desk. I mean, as you can probably see from here, I'm quite very flippant, and there's banter all the time. And I think if you fit into that, then that helps. In addition to the skills you may bring as a assistant lighting designer, I think just kind of fitting into that team as well, and knowing that people, can be light-hearted, and you're part of that, then I think that gives you a big step up for perhaps getting involved further on down the line.
Brilliant, thanks so much.
No worries.
Yeah, I think it is important. Like, I mean, you've sort of touched on it there, but it is important to point out that everybody's very, very friendly. I mean, like, everybody's willing to email you back, or at least acknowledge your email. Generally, lighting designers, and I think part of what we've tried to achieve with this is to prove that these people that in all our heads are sort of untouchable, God, they would never reply to me. That's not the case at all, and especially not at the minute. It's it really is worth just taking the shot.
I personally, I'll always reply, because I can remember when I was at college and making a point of writing to people, and I can remember I'm sure it was email, I'm sure the internet was invented then, but when Mark Jonathan was head of lighting at the National, and I remember going to see Mark, and he invited me, and that was part of my learning experience. So I just think to myself, the kindness other designers showed me, that why wouldn't I? The only limitation I'll ever have will be based on my schedule, which is the limitation that anyone in my life has to suffer with. So but I mean, I'll always make an effort of replying to people.
Yeah.
And like the worst thing, like the absolute worst thing that may happen is someone will go, I'm sorry, I'm really busy.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like the worst thing that can happen is they say no, and you've got nothing to lose. Like you already know that's what the response you might get is. But then if you get then it's an absolute like bonus.
Well, if I know where people are, I'll try to also make a note that I don't know if people are London based or whatever, that if it gets to a point where I'm doing something in London, then I'll say, oh well, even right now, if we can't get in the theatre together because it's limited access, but I mean, maybe we can grab a coffee or do the simplest thing. I mean, if I'm working in the West End, or equally if I'm working in Wales or Scotland or wherever, if I know that someone's reached out to me in that area, I'll say, just so you know, I'm going to be in town for a week. If you want to grab a coffee. I mean, if it all starts going to hell in tech and I've got to work through lunch, then I'll let you know. But otherwise, let's meet and have a chat, of course.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. We're sort of coming to a bit of an end there, really, but I've been doing a few little questions with people at the end, sort of a couple of quick fiery things. I'm going to pause because that's the end thing. So panic not, Charlotte. I can see your eyes panicking. You're going to have to answer these. Adam's just asked in the chat, Ben, your work is amazing. Do you find yourself using previs on every show now, or only when budget and time allows?
Only when budgets and time allow. Yes, it's the same thing. I mean, it's a great tool. It depends. I mean, there's certain things that shows like the Olivier Awards is a previs show on account of the fact that we only have something like 2 days to get into the Albert Hall and we're on air, and so therefore the show has to, by very necessity, has to be previs. But I do like it to use it, especially with programmers, especially because I think even if you don't create absolute cues, you start to get a language of how the rig's going to be used, and you create that shorthand, and you obviously you can build cue structures, and if you want to look at colours, although you don't necessarily need previs to do it, but you certainly, if you've got a moving light rig, you can get a real sense of how the rig will work, and you can impart a sense of what the aesthetic might be to a programmer as well, so you're all sort of going at it the same way. And then of course you can, if you've got complicated effect sequences, you can build those, but I think previs, if I was lighting drama scenes, I'd be reluctant to do much previs, only maybe to build preset focuses and moving lights, so I've got the skeleton of it there. I wouldn't commit much further than that. Yeah.
You do feel a bit like you're going around in circles sometimes. You're sort of double handling the work afterwards.
Yeah, you can get obsessed about it, but knowing that if it's a moving light rig, and in this scene you want a big 3/4 backlight and a dapple from over here, and you just need to build those presets so that if you can build those presets and put them in the notional colours that you want, but maybe not have the lights on and they're just sat there in a queue, then it sort of gets back to the days of conventional lights where you're worrying about intensities and just switching things on and off rather than having to make those other decisions. So you give yourself some, a few step ups, I guess, to help you. And if you, as I say, if you've got complicated effect, if you've got a set with loads of light bulbs or something on it, then actually previs is great because that just shows you what the patterns you are creating, and you can build all those building effects and things like that is really useful for And of course, in the concert world where the lighting is sort of providing the architecture in terms of beams of light, then you can create those shapes. But yeah, I wouldn't set about lighting a box set play, I don't think, in previous, because where you're gently ticking a bit of light through a window and a standard lamp and so on. I think you just do that in the real world.
Also, can I just say, because Ben won't say this, watching him and Alex program the Oliviers is incredible.
Oh.
Like, it's genuinely like any time, like, because I only done like the actual awards where I've called spots once, but like I've been into, like, because maybe something else has gone on or we've gone in for lunch or something, and watching you guys work is just incredible. Like, the amount of stuff that happens in previs before those awards is incredible.
So much, yeah. For a start, I get to sing all the songs myself to the people.
Yeah, that was good. We did a great Come From Away.
Yes, we did do a good Come From Away. But yeah, I mean, well, that is because there is no time. I mean, as far as there's time on the Oliviers to put the rig in, focus it, and then you're on camera basically. And you get, each performance gets about 10 minutes to rehearse. So a number like, well, not this year, last year, a number like the excerpt from 6, which was, a couple of hundred lighting cues. The only way you can achieve that is to have previs that. And then very quickly wrangle intensities and so on just to pull it into shape. But all that detailing in the lighting comes from previs.
How do you approach the colour for that? Like, because I mean, that it's an event that is specifically for camera. So is that, do you consider that in the previs or only once you get there?
Yeah, I do. So I mean, I have a sort of colour palette, I guess, that sort of works for the show that we know that are the basic colours. So they're, I don't know, say there's 25 colours, which are all your sort of party pack, and so we'll light with the colours that we have in mind, but then we balance the cameras, and we balance them somewhere between tungsten and daylight, so about 4,300 degrees Kelvin, which means that daylight will appear, like arc discharge light will appear slightly blue but is roughly white, and tungsten won't go too orange, so it sits nicely in the middle. And then what I'll often do is, on the first night, I'll ask for a reference camera. So this is before the camera crew have arrived, which is a wide shot of the stage, set to the white balance that we think and the exposure that we think, and then we can quickly bump through looks and go, well, that lavender, for example, is a really tricky color to get on camera because quite often it just goes blue.
Okay.
So in the case of 6 was a perfect example, being purple, is that we tweak the colors, and actually in the room it ends up looking almost like a baby pink, I guess, for it, because of the color, how the color temperature affects it on camera. So I will have a look through that. What we'll also do in terms of levels is, because we have to update several thousand cues, 1,000 cues, let's say, quickly, is that rather than with intensities, for example, like blinders, light bulbs on the set and so on, is that we'll make intensity palettes. So we'll have an intensity palette for a glow, a mid-intensity palette, a kind of burnout on camera intensity palette, which we'll plot in WYSIWYG, and it will, that might be 10%, 30%, 60%. But then again, with a reference camera, we can say, quickly stick everything in the glow intensity palette, dial it to that, the same for burnout and so on. And because that's what's been referenced in the cues, it also becomes good for the whole show.
Yeah.
So I think using references where it very quickly filters through the queuing means that you can bring out a WYSIWYG and make it look good on camera quickly.
Yeah. And what are your, sorry, this is an unplanned set of questions, but it's very interesting. What happens follow spot wise? Because I mean, so often when you record a show, your follow spots drop down to 20% of what they were at. But what's it like in the room? Are people comparatively dark compared to what you see on camera?
Not majorly, I don't think.
The big thing about anything for cameras is also the contrast. So between the background and the foreground, and that's, unlike the human eye, the camera can't deal with extreme contrast, which is why you can go two ways. If a live show, generally the spots are higher contrast, are brighter than the background. So there's two ways that the camera can deal with it, and that it can expose to the follow spot, so the person looks great, but there is no background, it's just dark behind them because all that lower intensity stuff's disappeared, or the background's great and then the person is glowing white because they're suitably overexposed. So all that, what I need to do is therefore manage that and limit it. So it's a combination of bringing the background up and the foreground, the follow spot or the foreground down. So I think it's not that it's dark, but it's that it probably in the room it will appear flatter because you don't have that contrast between the foreground and the background. I think there's that with follow spots, and then again, we need to figure out what the camera perceives as white, because I could have a source 4 pointing at someone, and I could balance that so that looks fine. But the minute I put a discharge source in it, it would look blue as you like, because the camera is perceiving incandescent warm white as being white, so therefore daylight is severely blue. So once I've decided that, say we're somewhere in between, so we're at 4,300 degrees Kelvin on the follow spots, is that then I will go around a series of putting filters in front of the follow spots to get the color temperature absolutely right, as a base point. So a white follow spot pointing on one of those lineup charts you get on TV, it will look white.
Yeah.
So that sets a foundation. And then if I want it to be warmer, then and all of this filtering will literally stick on the front of the follow spot, because that's just setting the foundation. And then if I want to make it cooler or warmer, then we can just use color flags to push us one way or the other from that.
Nice. Final question in the chat here. Adam said, with those shows already being designed, do you find yourself wanting to create new ideas for those numbers, or do designers have an influence in those performances?
Cameron was furious when I did Phantom in Pink. He was not amused with that at all. No, it's very much, I think my approach to those shows is that, and I go and see the shows, and I'll often speak to the creative teams, certainly speak to the lighting designers, is to capture the essence of a show, be it a sense of colour palette, what sort of energy the lighting has. So it's something like Six is obviously a kind of big, very sort of Eurovision style pop music, joyous, big lighting, whereas Come From Away is more sort of more sedate, I guess. So Phantom of the Opera, we did like Phantom of the Opera years ago, and of course there's all those beautiful Andrew Bridge sort of steely greens and cold whites and so on that we put. So I'll absolutely take on board the colour palette and the sort of texture, I guess, of the lighting. So you're sort of taking it in essence and then blowing up into this odd environment with an orchestra behind it and so on. But absolutely you should be able to look at those shows and go, that looks like Phantom of the Opera, or that looks like Miss Saigon, or things. Yeah. I've absolutely tried to be truthful to the original aesthetic.
Yeah, that's dead interesting to hear about. I'm going to start wrapping us up with these 3 questions. So, what would your Olympic event be? It doesn't have to be a real one that exists, but if you were to compete in something in the Olympics, what would it be?
Me, swing ball. I quite like swing ball. I found that in lockdown.
Oh, no way.
I'd be an Olympic swing ball champion.
Brilliant. What about you, Charlotte? What would you be?
CD alphabetizing.
Speedy alphabetizing?
No, CD. So I have a lot of CDs. Sometimes I get a load of new ones and then they're piled up, but then they need to go into order. So
of course, gosh, yep.
Obviously.
Yeah, I was expecting maybe colour to be how you arrange them somehow.
No, by alphabet, and then if solo artist by surname, obviously.
Oh, of course, sorry, yes, of course.
Don't anger her. It's not worth it.
Yeah. You know that thing about moving on to new assistants, Ben? Just a thought. Right, you're on a job, you're out for breakfast or brunch. What do you order?
Eggs Benedict.
Oh
gosh. Probably a pan au chocolat, if I'm being just grabbing something.
Brilliant. My final question for you both, and Charlotte will have been dreading this, I'm quite sure. What would the title of your award-winning autobiography be?
Oh gosh. People always take the piss at me because I use a lot of green, so maybe it should just be I Like Green, or something like that. Very simple, to the point.
I like that. I like green.
Let's just say I like green.
Charlotte, what about you?
I'm gonna go with, just because this is definitely just a joke that will need explaining, but Tales of Poco. We'll go with that.
Okay.
So when we were in Spain, when you're focusing, it's to go bigger, it's grande, and when it's smaller, it's Poco. And so Ben thought that was hilarious because I'm obviously short, and so for the entire time with it, it called me Poco.
Poco, I thought it'd be like a charming sort of children's book about Poco's adventures.
I think that's actually, initially I was a bit worried. Now you've told the story, it's actually a really nice one.
It was, yeah, it's heartwarming actually. It's ideal for Christmas. Hopefully it will be in Waterstones by then. Yeah, it's all hands drawn.
Brilliant. I look forward to it. Thank you both so much for taking the time to go through this with us, because it's been
It's been a pleasure.
There's no problem.